Alright, welcome back. This is part 2 for unwrapping a tree. Let's go ahead and jump right in, then start unwrapping. So the very first thing I want to do is figure out how to separate this branch from the rest of this trunk. Now I already covered this in the last lecture, so I'm just going to show you the answer, and then we'll define this a little bit better when we get to these other branches. So basically, it's the area where this branch meets the trunk, which happens to be right here. And you'll notice that because of the way I created this tree, that all of the inside parts here are all triangles, and everything on the outside of this seam are quads or four-sided polygons. And I did that to sort of help you stay on the right path. In the real world, you're not going to have that as a guide. There might be all quads here. There could be 5 or 6 or 7-sided. It could be a real mess. And not that this is, I'm not saying that this isn't messy, but it could be worse than this. Look for these triangles for now and make sure that the seam goes around all the triangles. Okay, so there's my selection, and all I need to do is mark that as a seam. The first seam is marked. So let's move our view up the branch a little ways, and let's find the next intersection. So if you follow this branch, this is the next intersection right here. This is where it splits off in 2 directions. So we're going to do the same exact thing here that we just did. So once you get your, general location, here's what I usually do. I start selecting some of this. It doesn't even matter at this point if they're the right ones, but start selecting some geometry in this general area and then zoom in on it by pushing the period on the numeric keypad. Now I'm kind of locked and centered on this, so it doesn't matter. I'm rotating around it and I can see all of the different angles of this quite easily. And now I can go in there and actually start picking the edges that represent the outermost boundary of the base of this branch. So that's what I'm doing. So I'm going to go ahead and mark that. Let's follow. We got a choice now. We can either go up this branch and find the next branch, or we could probably just finish out all the branches off of this main branch first. So I think I'm going to do that. So we'll start here and continue up the branch and find the next area. Grab a couple of these vertices. It doesn't even matter which ones they are. Zoom in on this area and then start outlining. So you can see that there's a triangle here and there's a quad over here. So this is probably one of the correct lines. And then we'll just work our way around this like so. So there's that selection. Again, mark seam. Let's continue moving up this branch, and you can see as you move up, it's got nowhere left to go. So there's no more branches that extend. So let's go back to the beginning and catch the first branch and work our way up this branch. Just follow it along like this and look for any intersections. So there's an intersection right there. I'm going to zoom in on that and then just kind of continue and doing what I have been doing. We're marking the base of the branch as a seam. Just like that. Is there any branches that extend off of there? No. Let's go back down and follow it back down. You can see this was our second branch, and it goes out, and there are no branches off of that. So I think we're done, at least with this one branch. You get the idea? Great. Let's move on. Now assume that you've actually gone and you separated all the branches of this entire tree. The next step is to do this. What we want to do is we want to split all of the branches the long way. So it's like splitting wood. Now I'm going to show you on this edge right here what that looks like. So I'm going to loop select this line, and you'll notice that it starts all the way from the very base of this trunk, and it goes all the way up and around this tight little corner here and all the way up to the very tip of this tree. That's a perfect selection. However, let's say that this was a first-person type game and you were walking down here and you were looking up and around at this tree. You have a perfect view of that seam. So this is probably not the best place to put a seam if this was a first-person game. So you might want to think about that before you mark that seam. So I guess if this was a top-down view, and specifically if this was your view of the tree, you can't see the seam at all, or you can catch just a very small glimpse of it over here and over here. But for the most part, it's pretty much out of sight. So if this was a top-down game, that would actually be a pretty good place to put a seam. But again, in first person, it's right there in front of your eyes. So what you might want to do instead, if it's a first-person game, is put your seam up here somewhere. So maybe like up here. Now, you'd be able to see the seam from this side, but you wouldn't catch a lot of it up top. You wouldn't see much of it out here. So you'd have to compromise and accept that you're going to see part of the seam because it's first person. And let's face it, I mean, you can strafe around this tree and you're going to catch a glimpse of the seam somewhere. But it's better to put the seam somewhere where you're going to see fewer parts of the seam from your vantage point. So in this case, this is the best place to put a seam, but you'll notice that the seam gets blocked by this branch. So something was in the way and it did not continue all the way to the end of the branch like it should. So in this case, what I would need to do is just add to the selection over here. And you'll notice it gets blocked by another branch. So let's just go and take a look over here and continue the selection from that branch. And it goes all the way to the tip, which is where we want it to go. So this would be a good seam if you wanted to put it on top. Now, you have to decide what how you're actually going to be viewing this object. If you're viewing it top down, or if you're viewing it first person, or if you're viewing it in front view or whatever, however you're viewing this object, that's where you're going to decide where to put your seam. For the rest of this lecture, I'm going to assume that I'm going to do a top-down view on this thing. So it's going to be kind of like this, like an isometric 3D kind of thing. So this is actually a bad place for my seam. So I'm actually going to go and put my seam underneath like I did the first time. Notice that I selected a different line this time, and it got blocked by that branch again. So I'd have to go over here and find my way all the way to the tip. Again, got blocked by another branch. So I'm just grabbing this line over here all the way to the tip, just like that. And I could mark that as a seam. But I happen to remember that it had no problem with any branches over here. So this might actually be a better seam for me. So I'm just kind of showing you and thinking out loud about choosing the right seam. In some cases, it's not the first thing that you choose. And in this case, it happened to be the first thing that I chose, but I tried other things and then ended up coming back to this. It's not a bad thing to do that. So let's go ahead and mark that first seam. And this is the trunk of the tree. I kind of have to do that anyway. Let's focus now on this branch. I'm actually going to, for the moment, I'm going to hide everything but this branch. That'll make it a lot easier to rotate around this without seeing all this other geometry. And this is the part of the tree that we're going to be focusing on for this lecture. So I'm going to hide everything except for that geometry. I'm going to unselect this so we can see our seams a little better. And again, we're going to be working on doing our unwrapping on this model as if we were playing a game top-down view. So we want to put all of our seams underneath. So let's go ahead and try to mark this as a seam. The general rule here is you want to make sure that the seam touches the base. So that's this red line right here. And you also want to make sure that it goes all the way to the very tip of the object, to the very circle at the end, okay? So it should have one smooth line all the way. And if it doesn't, you're going to want to make sure to to get through any obstacles or whatever, like you saw me doing a few minutes ago. So go ahead and select that seam and hit Control E and mark seam. We're going to do the same thing with every single one of these separated branches. So the next branch is over here. Again, we want to find a line that's kind of underneath, so maybe something like this. And once again, make sure that it touches this circle line right here. This is the base of the branch. And make sure that it goes all the way to the very tip. In this case, it gets interrupted by this branch right here, by the base of this branch. So I'm just going to pick it up again on the other side like that. By the way, I'm hitting Shift, Alt, and right click to do that. That's a good selection, so I'm going to go ahead and mark that as a seam. Let's go, while we're here, I guess, let's go ahead and grab this piece. So I'm going to Alt right click here, and notice it selects it all the way to the end. However, it didn't select this line right here. So I'm going to add that line to my selection and mark seam. Let's go back down, and let's work on this branch now. So again, I'm going to choose an edge here. Just going to note that it goes all the way to the tip, and let's verify that it also goes all the way to the base. So it does. It actually intersects right there. Go ahead and mark that as a seam. The next step is to unwrap this. So let's go over to our UV editing window and select all and unwrap. And you should have something like this. I would like to point out that things can go wrong, okay? And the way that I'm going to point that out is I'm going to unmark some seams to demonstrate what would happen if something went wrong. So let's imagine that I forgot to mark this seam right here. So we're imagining that I just didn't get it, I just missed it. It went right over my head. I didn't notice, and it never got marked as a seam. So I'm just going to go and clear that seam, and likewise I'm going to clear this seam right here, the seam that splits that. So let's imagine that I just didn't even think to unwrap that branch at all, and it never even got touched. So I'm going to go ahead and select all. Now you and I know that this branch is now not being unwrapped, but for the sake of this demonstration, we have to imagine that we don't know that. So we go ahead and unwrap this, and you'll see something like this. It's very hard to notice this, but you need to watch out for stuff like this right here. It kind of looks like a needle, and if you take an even closer look at it, you can see there's this weird geometry happening right here. And even closer, you'll see that there's a tangled mess of geometry right here. This is actually where the branch intersects with the larger branch. That's this right here. That's what you're seeing. And this long, thin, what I called a needle earlier, that's actually this whole branch. And what's happening is, first of all, I didn't split this down the middle, so it didn't open it up wide like this. It just left it a thin little line. And then the problem down here is all of that geometry is getting squeezed into this tight little area. So what you're watching for is these little, this kind of information. And when you see stuff like that, you can figure out where it is over here by simply doing something like this. Go ahead and turn this tool on. This is Keep UV and Edit Mode Mesh Selection in Sync. I'm turning it on. I'm going to unselect all of this geometry, so now you can actually see all of your UV information. Even though I don't have it selected, you can still see it. It's just grayed out. And now I'm just going to temporarily select the problem area, and you can see it light up like a Christmas tree over here, which is great. So that's kind of like a red flag saying, okay, this is where the problem is. So you don't really need to have that selected. You can just go over here and now take a look. And hopefully, especially with enough practice, you'll be able to identify what the problem is by just noticing that there's no seams on it. And then you might be looking at this and say, okay, I got it. There's no seams. So then go ahead and mark the seams just like you would. It doesn't matter what order you mark all of these branches. What matters is that they all get marked. So go ahead and mark that as a seam like this, and then go and select all and unwrap again. Now you'll notice I intentionally did not split it down the end, so I left out another seam. So you can see that the geometry of this UV got moved around. Now we have this even longer needle-like line here with this bit of geometry on the end. Again, the only thing that's really changed now is that this branch has been separated from the object that it was attached to previously. I'm not sure which object it was, but it was, let's say it was this one. It was coming out the end like this. Now it's separated, but it still has the same problem as this long needle-like shape. So all we really need to do is just come in here and split that down the middle by using the edge selection and just marking a seam. Make sure it goes all the way from the red baseline seam all the way to the tip. Go ahead and mark it as a seam. Select all, U to unwrap. So there we have a nice set of islands. Everything is laid out flat. And what we need to do is just put an image on this, like a UV grid image, and just see how the checkerboard pattern looks, and also whether the letters and numbers read forward or if any of them are backwards. It should be all right if you follow these instructions. So since there's no UV image, I'm going to go ahead and create one. And then let's go to the property shelf here. Change this to UV grid for starters. And let's take a look at this. I'm going to unselect this and just kind of take a look around like this. You can see that the checkerboard pattern is pretty much the same throughout the entire shape. It's pretty close. And everything looks pretty solid. Of course, the seams are uneven, but that's to be expected. That's why we put them out of plain sight. But this is a pretty good checkerboard pattern. So let's go to the color grid. And if you want to be able to read this a little bit better, just select all over here and scale this up a lot, something like this. And you'll be able to actually read these because they'll be smaller than they were before. And it looks like they're all going in the right direction, so that's cool. By the way, Alt-H will restore the rest of the tree, and we haven't unwrapped it yet, so it's this bright white color. And that's about it. This is how I would go about unwrapping a tree. If you have any questions, be sure to ask your questions in the discussions where everybody will be able to read them. And more importantly, I'll be able to help answer those questions and get you right back on the right track again. So good luck, and I'll see you in the next lecture.